Gras. Welcome to Passion Time, the show the experts share what they're passionate about. I'm here with Dr. Richard Sindelar. He's a professor at the University of St. Thomas. He was in the Foreign Service for many years, an expert in the Middle East. And of course, we have him here to talk about ISIS. But first, we want to ask you, how did you find your passion?
I got into the Foreign Service out of an interest in diplomacy, but at the same time really wanted to find a job where somebody would pay me to live overseas. So
What a smart idea. That's what I wanted to do.
So that's how I came to go to Georgetown Foreign Service School, graduated, then went into the Foreign Service a couple of years later.
Okay, Dr. Sindelar, as you know, since you teach this all the time, especially foreign policy, we are having trouble with ISIS. Not only the United States, but the West with the refugee crisis, also in Syria with 250,000 people dead, horrible 5-year civil war, and now we have ISIS. But I think what's missing, what tends to be missing, is what is the context? How was this created? How did this happen?
Well, it partly began as a spillover from the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Obviously, when we went in, there was any number of people who were opposed to a U.S. presence, including in Anbar province, Sunni stronghold, the Sunni branch of Islam. And they formed a group called Tawhid and Jihad, which was a group of Anbar region people interested in fighting against the U.S. And they attracted a lot of foreigners because there is kind of a roving band of, shall we say, ideological mercenaries who seem to go wherever the fight is. So they began to join in there. That group became Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They paired up with Al-Qaeda, became Al-Qaeda in Iraq. The surge happened, our surge in 2007, defeated them, pushed them back for a while, and soon thereafter they began operating in Syria as well.
Right.
And at that point they're taken over by a fellow by the name of Abu Omar al-Baghdadi. There have been two al-Baghdadis, and he was a particularly vicious fellow who adopted tactics that were even more violent and vicious than Al-Qaeda would ascribe to. So he, what happened over time was Al-Qaeda disowned him. It was Zawahiri, the person who replaced him.
He was too extreme for the extremists.
Too extreme for the extremists, and they split. In Syria, Al-Qaeda became al-Nusra.
Right.
In Iraq, they became very small and insignificant. The Islamic State, then, they renamed themselves the Islamic State in Iraq. When they moved to Syria big time in 2012, they expanded it and said Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, which some people translated as Syria. That's how you get ISIS. Or the State Department says ISIL because of the Levant connection.
Right. Now, we do have to bring in the issue that Saddam Hussein was a Sunni, right?
Correct, Sunni.
And most of his generals were Sunnis.
Correct.
And they're the ones that are running ISIS today, right? I mean, most of the generals went over there, not most of them, but many of them, right? To fight for ISIS.
Some, exactly. What happened over time is as we redeveloped the Iraqi government, it became a Shia majority government, a Shia controlled government. Now, whether or not in democracy you think that's a good or bad idea, what that effectively did is disenfranchise all the Sunnis who used to be in power. So they were looking for an option. And so Al-Qaeda in Iraq became their option. They paired up with Al-Qaeda in Iraq and have stayed with Al-Qaeda in Iraq when it morphed into ISIS.
So there is a conflict here, which is an old conflict.
Correct.
Between the Shias and the Sunnis. And obviously when the first leader, after we invaded, took over, he was not very encompassing and trying to unite the country. He was a Shiite, right?
Correct.
And that created a lot of problems for the Sunnis, right? They did not get along, and this was an issue that has become problematic to create a new nation.
Correct. What happened, oddly enough, it seems in the Middle East that when the new people come to power, they're mainly interested in feathering their own nest and helping their own tribes and people.
Right, right. It's still
So
a tribal society.
it's what happened with al-Morsi in Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood, and we saw it happen in Iraq, where al-Maliki, the first prime minister, leaned heavily toward the Shia. We had the surge, which drove al-Qaeda in Iraq out and crushed them, but when things calmed down, the Sunnis in that area were then confronted with Shia militia who committed all sorts of atrocities.
Yes.
So here we had a majority government who was doing nothing for their people, furthering their own Shia agenda, and all that did was regenerate the hatred of the Shia, and people were looking for some way to fight back against the Shia-dominated government. So that empowered the new ISIL.
How many people are we talking about in ISIL today, more or less?
That's a hard number to come by. You have as little as 20,000 and up to 70,000. I
Okay.
think most of the good guesses are 30 to 40,000.
Okay, now most of them seem to be Sunnis,
Correct.
correct?
Correct.
Okay, this is a proxy war, right? You've got Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran, the United States, the West. It seems like a lot of people are involved in this proxy war. What is happening there? Where are these people getting the guns, the money, to do what they're doing?
There are, well, ISIL itself is theoretically nobody's proxy because not even the Saudis support them directly. But you ask where do they get their money? A big chunk of their money comes from Gulf states and Saudis, private financiers who funnel money to them because they believe in the strict Wahhabi version of Islam, which of course ISIL has taken to yet a further extreme. But the point being they're funded partly by donations from extremist and fundamentalist Sunnis in the Gulf. They are funded in part by having seized massive amounts of Iraqi money, $300 or $400 million when they seized Mosul and the National Bank there. They are funded in part by oil revenue because they have oil which is exported illegally, usually $1 million or $2, $1 million per day in revenues theoretically from oil exported from territory they control. And they are quite big on selling antiquities. They blow up the buildings, but they actually keep the antiquities and they sell them on the black market. So their revenue stream is in the billions and hundreds of millions of dollars.
And I understand a lot of their weapons are American weapons that
they buy a lot on the open market, the black market. They also captured a ton of our weapons when they swept into Iraq and the Iraqi army fled, leaving behind everything from tanks to armored personnel carriers to rifles to bullets. They're heavily armed with our own weaponry now.
Now, and this seems to be happening a lot, right? The United States goes into these areas and then we leave their weapons and they use them against us. How is this group different from, how is ISIS different from other terrorist groups? For example, there is a difference between Al-Qaeda and ISIS. ISIS goes in, they seem to not have an agenda. They go and kill young people, women, children, and they have to blow themselves up to do it sometimes. They seem to be different from other terrorist groups.
Well, I think the big difference between ISIL and most other, at least Middle Eastern terrorist groups, is they actually have as their primary agenda the establishment of a state. Most other people are fighting against a state. They want to establish a state. And the state they want to establish in the Levant is the old caliphate from what's called the Umayyad dynasty and later the Abbasid dynasty. That dynasty straddled the Damascus-Baghdad axis, both the Umayyad and Abbasid. So there's a long, long history at the foundation of Islam for there to be a caliphate in just that area of the Levant.
All right. Well, Dr. Sindelar, we could talk for hours, but thank you for enlightening us, giving us some context on this issue.
Thank you very much.
We hope to have you back.
sé que tú puedes, que tú eres capaz.
Cambia tu vida,
La vida es una y tú vas a triunfar.
cambia tu vida.
Con fe y esperanza, las puertas